And of all the origins that we're interested in, of course, it's the origin of consciousness, which is the most fascinating. You know, in other words, when does the animal become the human? When is it no longer instinct, if that's what animal thought is? And of course, that's a deep question in itself. And become self-consciousness, not even reason, but simply awareness of self as separate from all that other. And some prominent answers to that question would be, in other words, the origin of this, what is the origin of this consciousness? What is the origin of this self-consciousness? Some people would say, for example, it's fear of death. That once the human brain gets big enough, it begins to project thought into the future. It no longer lives for the moment. And as soon as that thought is projected, or even perception is projected, a moment into the future, then it is possible to become aware of one's own death. And having become aware of one's own death, and the obvious inevitability of it, and the obvious meaninglessness of it, or let's say the impossibility of its meaning, then such thinkers of this school would say that from that moment on, self-consciousness exists, and therefore culture exists, and therefore civilization exists, and therefore the whole ball of wax. But you could also, instead of taking this death view, which, by the way, is somewhat related to Freudian thinking, although not precisely, you could also take another leaf from Freud, or from the Freudians in general, and talk about sexuality as the origin of consciousness. That once a sexuality is separated from instinctual behavior, whatever the hell that might be, and you know, actually, I was looking at there was a PBS special on the love life of the animals, you know, sort of animal porn, you know, from PBS animal porn. And the variety of, you know, the absolute stunning variety of ways of making love that exist in the animal world certainly puts a very big question mark next to the whole idea of instinct. But anyway, let's assume that the beasts have instinct and the humans have something more, and that something more is desire, which again is a projection into the future. Even when the beloved object or the desired object is absent, one desires the object, the person, the thing, whatever it might be. So that passion or sexuality or desire then becomes the spark that brings consciousness into being. Another theory which I like a lot, the chief proponent of which at the moment is Terence McKenna, another Irish-American bullshit artist, is that consciousness arose because of the ingestion of psychedelic plants. That and this sounds funny, you know, but the more I think about it, the more I realize it's certainly a theory that deserves to be layered into that palimpsest along with the other theories. To look on it as exclusively true, the way Terence does, I think gets you into various kinds of conceptual difficulties. But to look on it as also true, along with other theories, that makes it to me very, very interesting. That suddenly restores its interest as a theory. So you can imagine that an early hominid, some Australopithecine or Peking man or woman, or Java man or woman, or Homo habilis, or one of these very, very pre-human humans, if you can think of them that way, in browsing over various plants, not knowing whether it's good or bad, so, you know, accidentally ingests some psilocybin or Amanita muscaria or fly agaric or ergot or some other naturally occurring psychotropic. And of course, in the New World, there are hundreds of such plants. The Old World, in some ways, seems strangely poor in psychotropic plants, but it's certainly not lacking in them. And another point about psychotropic plants is that some of them are only activated by a process. They have to be processed in some way, like ayahuasca, for example, has to have other plants added to it before it becomes a viable psychotropic. So that in any case, I think Terence's image is that a kickstart was needed for the human condition. That something needed, that these hominids needed a boot in the ass to set them on the way of being human, whatever that was going to be, and that some mushroom supplied this kick. Then there's then there's a theory which I'd like to bring in tangentially, which is the theory of Georges Bataille, B-A-T-A-I-L-L-E, who in his book Theory of Religion, and also to a certain extent in The Accursed Chair, discusses the question of the origins of consciousness and of sexuality and so forth. And he speaks of a hypothetical original order of intimacy, is what he calls it. In other words, hypothetically for him, at the beginning of human consciousness, there is no separation. There is somehow consciousness without separation, so that the human condition has already been reached, but there is no self-awareness in the sense of self-alienation. There's no potential psychotic split or abyss that has yet opened up within human consciousness. And this is the stage that's referred to in every body of myth or folklore as the time when the gods walked the earth, when the animals spoke like humans, when all the orders of existence were on a single horizontal plane and in direct communication and, as you might say, ecological relation with each other. And I think Bataille's weak point is that he's unable to describe or explain why this order of intimacy should be broken. What would induce the doubling of consciousness in a situation like this? This surely would be perfection. This would be like a permanent psychedelic state, in which one was always acting on the basis of of what we might call a transcendent consciousness, which is also immanent at the same time and involved in things, involved in the world, in nature. So what is it that causes then what Bataille calls the violence of the sacred? Presumably under the order of intimacy, there is in fact no consciousness of the sacred, just as in Bali there's no word for art. But everyone, the artist is not a special kind of person, but every person is a special kind of artist. So also projecting backwards into the Paleolithic, or to the origins of humanity, wherever they may be or whenever they may be. There's also this also pertains. So, what possible shock or catastrophe could have occurred to break that original order of intimacy and make future generations view it as a hideous chaos instead of as the golden age? That's the question, or that and many other questions about breaks and abysses and separations is the question that I'm proposing. And I'm not proposing to answer it with any one single simple-minded answer. But I want to create a complex web of references to various theories about this moment, this tragic, catastrophic moment, which may, of course, have been extended over centuries or even millennia of time, but which appears to us in retrospect, obviously, as a moment, a crack, out of which time and space, as two different things, emerge. This also leads directly to the whole question of art and writing. In the hypothetical original order of intimacy, when the animals spoke to man and the gods walked on the earth, what would have been the point of art or writing? Obviously, there would be no point. Just as all consciousness would be a kind of perpetual psychedelic trip or high, so also all art would be life itself. It would be totally indistinguishable. Not only would there be no word for it, there presumably would even be no words as yet at all.